Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hearth. Do you listen to the radio? If so, what do you like to listen to? Perhaps music is your thing? Maybe country, classic rock? Perhaps something more obscure, like jazz or classical music? Perhaps you're more inclined toward talk shows, or news, or maybe sports is your area of interest. What do you think it would be like if your radio stations were a two-way street? If they could hear you, if they could learn about you, the more you listened? How would you feel if your favorite country station or your favorite sports broadcast listened back? Janet Parks was content with her life. Every day, save Wednesday, she woke to her 7 a.m. alarm, showered, dressed, and was out her door by 8 o'clock. She grabbed breakfast and coffee from the Dunkin' Donuts that was on her route to work, which she ate as she drove. 10 minutes before 9, she would arrive at Jensen Aerol Technologies, where she would begin her workday. She wasn't anything special at Jensen Aerol, and that was fine by her. She spent her days answering phone calls and scribbling dates onto calendars, or occasionally crossing them out. Every day, save Wednesday, she was done by 5 p.m., and she would drive back home, cook herself dinner, and watch her newest Netflix addiction until 10, when she turned in for the night. On Wednesdays, she worked the afternoon shift, which meant her day essentially functioned in reverse. She would make herself breakfast, watch her shows, break for lunch, then leave for work at 3, stopping to grab dinner on the way. 10 minutes before 4, she would arrive at Jensen Aerol, where she would answer phone calls and scribble dates until 11, when she would clock out and head home. She used to question what kind of company took phone calls until 11, but as time passed, she became less interested in asking questions and more interested in budgeting her paycheck, which was pleasantly hefty for someone who just answered phones. She couldn't imagine how well the researchers and engineers were paid. Saturday and Sunday were her days off, which she split between watching her shows, treating herself to Chinese food, and origami, a new hobby she had picked up that was proving to be deceptively intricate. Even the crane, which was something of the staple origami shape, a thing she had seen many times before in movies or even hanging in craft store windows, proved to be less than simple. She enjoyed it though. It was a relaxing pastime to her, and helped her keep her mind off of stressful things. Yes, Janet Parks was quite comfortable where she was at, and she had no inclination to change anything. Unfortunately for her, change has never made a habit of asking permission, nor does it tend to explain itself. It was a Wednesday, just after 11. Janet was in her car, listening to the radio as she drove home. Her car supported Bluetooth, but she simply enjoyed the radio more, a trait her friends found perplexing any time they drove with her. However, she had her reasons. Against all odds, her favorite talk show, a supernatural true crime mix called The Life in a Day, could not be found anywhere save FM radio. There was no website, no advertisements, no trace of it anywhere except the radio. A Life in a Day ran hour-long episodes at all times of day, and Janet often wondered how they managed to run the show 24/7. She imagined the host had to go home at some point. Tonight, she was just in time to catch the tail end of an episode about a medium in Wisconsin who had been arrested some 40-odd years ago for murdering her clients, supposedly at the behest of a spirit living in her house. It seemed like an interesting story. She was disappointed to have missed the real meat of it. Fortunately, she had enough time left in her drive to hear most of whatever came next. The familiar jingle sounded, and the host's voice faded in, as if he had not also been the star of the previous program. Welcome, everyone, to A Life in a Day. I am your host, Stephen Blaine. Today we have quite the special episode for you. You see, for those of you just joining us, today is our 10-year anniversary. That's right, we've been on the air for 10 whole years. And all day, we've been covering some of our most exciting stories, from Satanists to cult leaders to mediums. Tonight, just short of midnight, we have saved the best for last. Janet perked up. Best for last sounded interesting. She couldn't wait to see what would top a spiritualistic murderer. Our story is about a woman, by all accounts, average. She works a job, just like the rest of us. She pays her bills, sweeps her floors. She trips getting out of bed, just like the rest of us. As I said before, she's an average, ordinary, everyday person. Janet could feel her excitement rising. What twist would this story hold? Murder? Some form of spiritual espionage? Both, perhaps? Janet Park is a secretary for Jensen Aero Technologies, a giant of the technology industry, as the name would suggest. She spends her days answering the phone and booking appointments for men and women much richer and more important than her. Yet, in a way, that makes her irrevocably important in her own right. Janet was taken aback. She glanced at the radio. She couldn't possibly have heard that right. She enjoys dramas and true crime shows, the host continued, and she has been an avid listener to our humble station for a while now. We tip our hats to you, Janet. Janet was shocked. The episode really was about her. How had they gotten this information about her? She had never sent them anything. She couldn't. There was no way to contact the station that she knew of. She simply listened to the station during her daily commute. She's a fan of origami, an admirable hobby. I practice myself. Although, I'll admit I only learned so I could make those cranes that you see every now and then. I've got a few sitting next to me right now, actually. You keep at it, Janet. You'll figure it out eventually. A smile cracked Janet's face. She didn't know how they knew this much about her. She thought maybe she should be a little worried, but the episode was about her. She couldn't flush out her excitement. There was something about hearing the host talk about her that was so uplifting. Perhaps one of her friends found a way to send in an email about her or something. That must be it. She would have to make some calls tomorrow to find out who. Her favorite fruit is strawberries, and she has a general dislike for cheese, which is a shame. She's missing out on some really good cheese. Blaine chuckled. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Janet Park is well and truly under the radar, everyday, ordinary, average. The most exciting her life has ever gotten was the time she tripped the fire alarm in high school. Janet slammed on the brakes. She had never told anyone that story. It had been a dare. The one and only dare she had ever accepted. She had done it to impress some boy whose name she couldn't even remember now. He had been the one to dare her, and consequently the only one who knew what she had done. She hadn't seen him in almost 8 years. How had they even found that out? She's never once stopped to think that maybe we're not alone in the universe. She's never thought about what lies beyond the stars, or in the depths of the sea, or deep beneath the surface of the earth. You've never thought about what comes after death, or what the end of everything will be like. You haven't given anything like that much thought, have you, Janet? Janet stared at the radio, shocked and deeply unsettled. He was addressing her directly. Why was he addressing her? She was beginning to believe that her friends had nothing to do with this broadcast. Remember when you were a child and you had to sleep with the lights on? You thought it was the only way to keep the monsters out. Blaine continued. Where did that go? Why did you stop believing that? Because everyone around you told you monsters weren't real? What makes you think they were right? After all, I talk about human monsters every day, Janet. What makes you think there aren't more out there? What if the things that go bump in the night weren't just your imagination, Janet? What if there really is something out there, at the edges of your mind, creeping in every now and then? What would happen if you started looking for them, Janet? What do you think you would find? Blaine's voice lowered, and Janet found herself leaning in to listen. How do you know that I'm not one of them? After all, do you even remember how you found this station? Janet thought back, confident at first. Of course she knew. Yet, now that she thought about it, she couldn't recall ever finding the station. Had she found it? She couldn't remember. Perhaps someone had told her about it? She couldn't recall. She simply started listening to it. How had she known what station it was on? Uneasiness surfaced within her. Surely this couldn't mean anything. Perhaps she'd simply forgotten. People forget small details all the time, after all. Come now, Janet. You're not seriously going to chalk it up to forgetting, are you? Think about it for a moment. There's no website, no email, not even a phone number or a studio address. Yet here I am, talking about things even your friends don't know about you. How would I know? No one else you know listens to this station, Janet. How would they have contacted me? Who would have given me this information? Or, perhaps, did I already know? Think about it, Janet. This had gone from odd to unsettling to outright creepy in a matter of minutes. The more Janet thought about it, the more she realized she knew nothing about a life in a day. She couldn't remember how she had found it, not even when she found it. She changed the station. She didn't have the stomach for this. See what I mean, Janet? Her stomach twisted into knots when she heard Blaine's voice. She changed the station again. You never thought about these things. Not even once. She cycled through all her saved stations, then simply skipped at random across FM. Yet, no matter where she went, it was always Blaine on the other end. Her display wasn't even showing any station numbers anymore. In place of the numbers, there were strange symbols she had never seen before. One last piece of advice, Janet. I would sleep with the lights on, if I were you. Static faded in, then, after several moments, there was silence. Janet stared at her radio. She swapped stations, but was greeted by the same empty, noiseless response. She turned her radio off, sitting in silence, her headlights the only thing illuminating the pitch dark in front of her. All of a sudden, the drive home seemed much more harrowing. She started at movement in the bushes, breathing a sigh of relief when a squirrel scrambled out across the road. She took a deep breath and put her car back in drive, cautiously resuming her drive home. Just to be safe, she turned her high beams on, and the closer she got, the faster she drove. Janet would never hear A Life in a Day again. In fact, she stopped listening to the radio altogether. Any search for the meaning of those symbols she saw led to a dead end, and eventually she stopped looking. She never quite got her peace of mind back. She slept with the lights on, as Blaine suggested, and she stopped going out at night. Every now and then, perhaps from her couch, perhaps from her bedroom window, she would catch sight of something, a strange shadow or a sudden movement, something out of the ordinary, something not quite right, and she would curl up a little tighter, waiting for it to go away. 4,000 miles away, a man named David Mason was a plumber. Every Monday through Friday, he got out of bed at 5 in the morning, showered, ate 2 untoasted slices of English muffin for breakfast, then left his home. The number of jobs he did per day varied, but that was about the only variation in his day. His workday finished at 5, at which point he packed up his van and headed home, where he spent his evening eating dinner with his family and watching the news until he went to bed. Saturday and Sunday were his days off, which he spent with his family. He had reached a stable point in his life. Not much changed, and anything that did was inconsequential. He lived the same days over and over again, and he was content with that. It was a Friday night, just before 9. David sat in front of the TV, watching the news. He had been watching a movie with his kids, who had insisted on staying up just a little longer tonight. Tomorrow was Saturday, so David deemed it harmless to allow them to stay up a little later. Yet, as children often do, they had overestimated themselves, and were sound asleep on either side of him on the couch. David had the TV turned down low to avoid waking them, and was watching the newscaster talk about a fire that had occurred downtown. She was just about to recount the victims when suddenly the channel faded to static. David frowned, reaching for the remote. He flicked through the channels, confronted every time by the same static-filled screen. He slowly extricated himself from his children, getting up and examining the TV. Unfortunately, he was a plumber, not a technician. Nothing appeared glaringly wrong, which covered the extent of his knowledge on electrical appliances. He shifted the TV back and forth, hoping he might fix the problem by chance. And by chance, it seemed, he did. The static faded out, a calm musical number floating in. He sat back down and raised the remote, prepared to head back to the news channel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Life in a Day. A wiry, older man sat at a desk, bookshelves in the background giving the scene an ambience similar to a home office or a study. For the briefest of moments, David Mason's face went slack. His eyes glazed over, his mouth hanging open. His arm hung in the air, the remote dangling precariously in his hand. It was like his mind had been turned off. Then he sprung back to life, putting the remote on the ottoman and leaning back on the couch, settling in gently between his sleeping children. "My name is Stephen Blaine," continued the man, "and I'll be your host tonight.